This is AUGforums.com Real Talk. First, thank you to our sponsors, APS Payments, Kenzium, and DataSelf. You can learn more about how our sponsors work with Acumatica by going to augforums.com/sponsors. My name is Tim Rodman, and I'm coming to you live on Monday, February 1st, 2021. This is episode number 39, update on Acumatica user groups from Joel Gress. Joel, thanks for coming on, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hey, Tim, thanks for having me. Appreciate you reaching out. My name is Joel Gress. I'm with Dynamic Tech Services. We're an Acumatica Gold partner. Been working with Acumatica now just about 10 years. A little bit of my background. I started with Solomon Software as a product, DOS-based system back in '92. Was supporting that for a telecom company, and eventually that company was acquired and became part of a larger telecom unit. And the reseller for our Solomon installation at that company said, "Hey, can you help some of our other customers? You're doing a pretty good job." So around '96, we formed Dynamic Tech Services, and the ERP trajectory was set. And maybe about 2010, I think is about the time Microsoft had said, just before one of their events, that the accounting ERP space is not ready for the cloud. And I thought, that doesn't really fit with what I'm seeing. Leads coming in are saying cloud ERP, we'd like a cloud solution. So we started looking around, and we came across Acumatica through some of the other that we knew, and attended one of their first events up in Virginia. I think that was around October of 2010, and was a great event. And we moved on to join Acumatica in 2011. So that brings us to here we are today, enjoying this great Acumatica community and people like you that put together these wonderful forums.
Awesome. Yeah, 2011, 2010. I mean, you were one of the earlier partners. You are very much a veteran in this Acumatica community.
Well, we've seen a lot of change. I'm always impressed with the documentation that exists today, because I can remember there not being any. So.
Me too.
It's come a long way.
Some people complain about it, but it's a lot better than it used to be, and getting better. I feel like it's a lot better than it used to be, and getting better. I feel like
it is a lot better. If you look back at the early releases, it was a lot about adding functionality, resolving some issues, and now it's just about lots of new features. I was just reading the 2021 R1 beta release notes. And again, another 100 plus features being added to the product. So just the rate of innovation is just incredible.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up, but it definitely keeps things interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, we were comparing it to some of the legacy products that we've worked with, like Dynamics SL, and they'd have a release. It used to be every 3 years, and they'd add 20 features. Acumatica, over 100 features twice a year. I'm impressed. I really am. So, and that was one of the reasons why we kind of user group as well. There were so many features that were being added, and it was really hard to get your hands around them and to help users embrace them and take advantage of them. You do an implementation, they're using the core functionality, then bells and whistles come in, after the fact. Well, some of these bells and whistles don't stop. I mean, Acumatica keeps rolling them out. So there's a need for a larger community to start having a conversation about, well, what are you doing with the system, and how are you using this feature, and how are you solving this problem? And so the user group was a great way to do that. And so, kudos to Doug Hollenbach for kicking it off. I think he started it really as a way to get some information into the hands of people that weren't able to attend the Acumatica Summit. So he'd hold it a month or so after the Acumatica Summit. and he was having some good success with that. And we decided here in the kind of kick that off, and we had a round of pretty good events.
Yeah, Doug Hollenbach, of course, out of Denver, Colorado. I think you're down in Atlanta. And I actually got to go to one of Doug's events, stayed at his house, and it was really cool, very kind of a not exclusive club feel, but very much just an open, nice get-together. We even had a get-together the night before the actual user group meeting. And, like you said, I'm glad you brought that up about what motivates you to participate. One of the motivations is just that there's so many new features. Same thing for me. You can't keep up on it yourself. And I feel like no one knows everything about the product. So you just have to connect with others who know different things. And that helps you understand better, how to handle certain situations, that community.
Yeah, and it's such a flexible
community.
Yeah, and it's such a flexible solution that you can go in with the premise of here's how the system's going to be utilized in the customer site. They get used to it and they start using it in a different way. You go back 6 months later and they've rolled out some new features or they've modified the way that they're doing things, and you learn something new from the customer. Just hadn't thought of utilizing it that way under that scenario. We've got a customer that needs to have interactions with a manufacturer about creating new products, and there's a whole string of conversations that are in email that go back and forth, and they're having a hard time tracking that. They're using Acumatica cases. I mean, not really what a case was designed for, but maybe kind of. It's tracking a conversation string, right?
Yeah, so many creative ways to do it. And I think getting people in a room, all about just one side knowing it, consultants knowing it, or Acumatica employees knowing it, customers bring a lot to the table as well. You get them together in a room and good things happen. At least that's been my experience. How's your experience been with it?
Yeah, that's absolutely been the case. So, the whole, the in-person piece is important. Of course, the pandemic is kind of, put the kibosh on that. So we haven't been able to have in-person events, which is unfortunate. And kind of moving to the virtual platform, I think we're all a little bit fried on these online meetings. So that really hasn't come about either. I know after Doug had done his round of events, and then we kicked off the user group Southeast, which we've still got, our Twitter and LinkedIn sites up and running, and we're pushing content through. It's AUGSE, and we're just referring after. We're hopeful that in the near future, we'll have some in-person events. But in the meantime, it all got rolled over to Acumatica, trying to bring them together. We did a user group event at the last summit, and from there started conversations with Siobhan at Acumatica about, hey, Siobhan, this is really something that Acumatica should lead the charge on. We had several different regions and different partners that are coming into the mix. I mean, here in the Southeast, we had 5 partners that were sponsoring us. I think there were 3 or 4 partners up in the Northeast, and another, 3 or 4 partners in the Midwest, and others that were interested in jumping on board. So we had all these chapters, popping up all over the place, and we were creating content out of the Southeast. So I said, hey, let's put us all on the same web page. Let's, broadcast some of this content. So that, hey, let's put us all on the same web page. Let's, broadcast some of this content so that you can then have conversations with the people there about what you're seeing. Kind of like, watching a short little snippet, in a classroom about something informational was the goal, and then having people break out into sessions to share, their thoughts. I was hopeful that sharing would go across these different locations. We had some customers that were a little isolated from where the partners were located, so we started having customers volunteer to host sites and have other customers come there and meet them. And it really started to break out into this network of locations, of user communities that were coming together, and then a central broadcast. But of course, pandemic came into play, and we handed everything over to Acumatica, started hosting a couple of events. They put together a board. So if you went out to the community.acumatica.com, there is a user group section. There is a board that's out there, and the board is made up of customers and partners trying to guide the direction of the user group for the future. I did reach out to Siobhan and just say, hey, Siobhan, what sort of thoughts on the user group going forward? Are you having an event at Summit? And, I know Siobhan is busy. He did come back and just said, they're hoping to have a user group event at Summit. And as we both know, Summit has been pushed into July. And so no news yet on a user group event, no timing per se on user group events. But I do expect that user group events will come back, that there'll be a round of virtual events, that will also be some in-person events as soon as it's safe for everybody to get together again.
So Acumatica announced the user groups at the last summit. They had a couple of slides during one of the keynote presentations. I remember that. And then the day before, the Sunday afternoon, we had that user group event that you led up somewhere in some room, somewhere in the hotel, a ballroom, and that kind of kicked things off. And I've had a few people ask me since, they saw that. I think it was acumaticausergroup.com was the website that was publicized there. And
right.
Now they've gone for that and they can't find it. And there was a nice map there on the front that showed a map of the United States with the different color-coded regions. And people have been looking for that, and it's not there anymore. I think it's actually forwarding to community.acumatica.com, and then you can go /groups to see the user groups there, but I don't see any regional pages. Do you know anything what the current status is of that and what's going on there?
Yeah, the last update I had was, first off, you're right. There was a acumaticausergroup.com domain, and my team created the website and put the map up there and started to identify not only partner user group locations, but customer user group locations where gatherings could happen. We turned that all over to Acumatica, gave them the domain, and kind of talked to them a little bit back and forth about the structure. What came out of it is that regions were probably not as efficient a way to handle it, because it creates another tier. You'd have a region and then you'd have all of these locations. Instead, they started, if you had seen on the community early on, they actually started to recreate some of those chapter and region locations, and then they fell back to the national user group scenario. There's right now only about 156 people that look to be registered with the user group, and they've had a couple of virtual events. There's no map anymore. There's no official designation of chapters, though in conversations with Acumatica, they said there is a plan to recognize the chapters again. And so we've put our hat in to say, hey, we'd like to continue to participate in the user group, and we'd like to be recognized as a chapter, and then bring the partners that were part of the original sponsorship down here in the Southeast back together and start hosting events again.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is that right now with the pandemic, you mentioned there has been some virtual events. It's sort of like a webinar format. It's not that interactive. It's more like a traditional webinar. Is that what you've seen?
That is what I've seen. I mean, there's been some Q&A. I think they're going through a little bit of a progression. It started with some informative pieces, and there were technical questions, but I don't think that they had enough technical folks on the call to answer those, and it looked like they were making a shift to have some more technical people, and I think they're just finding their way. I mean, a user group kind of overlaps with some feature training, and so perhaps we'll see more of those training type components come in. They had some users that were sharing a little bit about how they were using some of the features in the system, and I think that was helpful. One of our customers was a presenter at one of the events. Talking about how they were using business events, which is one of those features that I think is underutilized. I wish I had more information on where they were going to go and the timing. I do know that Acumatica is ramping up and adding even more staff. I expect and hope that some of these resources will go towards the user group because in conversations I've had with folks at Acumatica, they said they really do see the value in it. I'm sure they're spending a lot of time right now with the new community, which I think is great. Getting thousands of Acumatica users together on that forum and having discussions and sharing information, I think is wonderful. Bringing the product ideas into that community so that they have more visibility is, again, wonderful. Sometimes, you jump from one to the other, but, give them a little time and I'm sure they'll get a handle on that.
Yeah, I've been liking it as well. And I hope also that they put more resources towards the user groups. And I really liked your idea last year. I can't recall when we last talked about it, but the idea you mentioned where you'd have it's kind of like a central broadcast, right? So that you could get together wherever with whoever, however many people, and you essentially just watch a broadcast together. So you have some type of central content, but then you are physically together. So then you can have conversations afterwards. I really like that idea because that's the hardest part about as a user group is continuing to have content and lining up people to present something. And I think your original idea was that you would take care of that and bring people in, and then you just broadcast it out, and then people can meet at the same time in their place and just watch it. I thought it was a cool idea. Do you know if Acumatica is looking to continue that, or it seems like it's just kind of on hold with the pandemic and we're waiting to be able to get back in the same room again?
I think it's on hold with the pandemic. I think they're focused on trying to get the summit off the ground. And once they have the summit, that they can have an opportunity to discuss and refocus the user group. I like the idea as well. I thought it was great. You've got some technical resources which have limited availability at Acumatica that can really present some of these features and functions very well. And we wanted to keep it so that it wasn't focused on a single partner or partners giving presentation. We wanted the manufacturer to give presentations, and we wanted them to show these new releases and this functionality and what's going on to the users, and then be able to get that feedback directly from the users and for the users to have that discussion. So if you've got multiple different chapters that are all requesting resources from Acumatica, it makes it hard for Acumatica to do that. But if you say, Acumatica, we need one person for 45 minutes to do a presentation on whatever it is, business events, and we're going to be sharing it across 10 locations with, X number of people participating. What do you say? That's an easy yes for them.
Yeah, then it's a one point of entry, but expanding it out on the back end to as many people as you want. I'm curious your current thoughts on that, especially with the pandemic. What's your current thoughts on whether or not that really needs to be live, or whether it could be still people getting together, but you have kind of a library of recorded content you could just play. Then you could handle your own time zone, your own schedule, whatever works for your local area. Well, what's your current thoughts on that?
Yeah, we did some questionnaires at our different events, and we asked, what's the value of the user group? What's the value of these events? And it seemed to be consistent that being there in person to have a conversation with another person and connect with them made a difference. It also made a difference that they went to a location and they actually identified a window of time that they were focused on whatever the topic was. Okay, and really it was around understanding Acumatica more. Or maybe some people showed up just to share more information about Acumatica because they wanted to make it easier for the new people that were coming on board. So that in-person piece is important. it's great to have a library out there, to have lots of recordings. You look at all the content on YouTube and a library out there to have lots of recordings. You look at all the content on YouTube and lots of people are consuming it, and they're consuming it in isolation. And when you consume the information in isolation like that, you have a one-dimensional perspective. It's your own perspective of what that information is conveying. But when you're in a group of people and you've all watched it, and someone asks that question that gives you an aha moment, that's what triggers something new. Okay? And that's the beauty of a user group and people coming together to have those conversations and to interact and to hear other people's questions and other scenarios about this is what we're trying to do. This is what we started to do in Acumatica to address it. Has anybody else done anything similar to that? Right. And it's about getting that information out there. We have a customer that's done a pretty impressive customization. Acumatica wrote it for them. It reached out to us and said, "Hey, we saw that you had this product demonstration of a customer case study around the solution. We need that. How do we get it?" Right? And the answer was, go to your Acumatica partner and reach back out to Acumatica, and they can work with you to put this piece in place. Well, think about the number of functions and features and things that people have created all across the Acumatica community. Think about how many could benefit other companies that are out there. And the only way for us really to communicate those outside of having some library of every customization, online that people can search through is to come together in a community format and to have that conversation and to see that interaction and to have those questions pop up that give us these aha moments. Aha, you've got a solution. I want to, right?
That's a great description of it. I like the way you phrased it. You watch it on your own, and it's one-dimensional. I think that's a great description of it. You get people together, and now you've got multiple angles that you're looking at it. You can't have an aha moment by yourself. You need some catalyst for that, right? Getting people in the rhythm exponentially, I think, increases the chance you have an aha moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're an implementer just like I am on Acumatica, and we go through the same kinds of discovery scenarios. And you probably are familiar with when you get the customer together and multiple people in the room, and you ask them to explain their process, they start to have aha moments themselves, just around what they're doing internal to their organization. Taking that externally, taking that group and bringing them to an event like a user group, just amping that group and bringing them to an event like a user group just amplifies the amount of aha moments they could have, right?
When I went to the user group in Denver and stayed at Doug Hollenbach's house the night before, there were a couple things I noticed about the event. One was, format-wise, I think we ran a couple of hours total. And what we did beforehand, there was kind of like just get together, and there was some snacks and some drinks. And then we had, more the official schedule with a little presentation. And then at the end, we had same thing, just sort of mix it up and snacks and drinks. And I feel like, to me, the most valuable part of it is the snacks and drinks time. So the critical piece there is that you have some food there. You have something to stand around and munch on, or something to sip on while you're talking. But you also need that core like presentation part. Otherwise, people wonder why they're there, right? So both are needed. Yes. But I feel like the real value is actually the conversations that are happening before and afterwards. I'm curious what your experience has been like down in Atlanta.
Yeah, very similar. The number one thing that people said on surveys was more time to interact with one another. And at one of our sessions that was hosted at a customer site, we did a little bit where we just said, open Q&A. And this came from another gentleman that I had met at the summit, and he said he had run user groups. He said when we got together, people would walk in and they'd write something on the whiteboard that was a challenge that they were facing. And during the meeting, they'd go back and they'd reference those items that were a challenge. So instead of having people write on the whiteboard, we just said, who's facing a challenge right now? What is an obstacle for you to level scenario? And then I'd say, okay, who's got an answer for them? Okay. Because it wasn't for me to answer their questions. It was for me to be a moderator and to help get the community supporting themselves. And we'd have other people say, well, here's what we did in that scenario. And they'd share a little bit. And if there was a gap, sure, I'd share some information and point to resources, point them back to their partner and say, your partner could help in these areas as well. And that there was a lot of value in that. So yes, a topic that they can have a conversation on, but then also getting them to start that conversation. You remember high school with the boys on one side of the dance floor and the girls on the other, and trying to get them to come together. So what we'd see is groups of people that came together from a company might sit together and continue to have the conversation about their Acumatica implementation and how they're using it inside their group with all these other people around them having these conversations. So what I started to do was go around and sit with the different groups and ask them what they were talking about, and then introduce them to someone across the room and have them come sit with them and start a conversation. So we started to create more cross conversations, which just created more value. Right? People started exchanging contact information, which was great. It's one of the reasons why when we built the AcumaticaUserGroup.com website originally, we used a platform that allowed people to friend other people, much like you do on a social platform, and to message them directly and create little subgroups. I mean, the idea was, let's let this grow on its own. Okay?
You had like these side conversations going on, but then at a certain point, it's not like you would have one big group discussion that would be moderated?
Yes. Well, it was really, you get up there and just ask who has a challenge. I mean, that's the moderated piece. And this was after there was a presentation and we had some discussions around it. It will always lead to, okay, well, you've seen the content today. We've discussed this. You've got some ideas. You've got some action items to go forth. What else do you have that we haven't covered? What would you like to see covered in the next meeting? Okay, what are the things that are important to you? And people would raise their hands and share. They'd fill out the surveys and provide us some feedback. Of course, if you were doing construction edition, you wanted construction edition, centric user group. If you were manufacturing, you wanted manufacturing, and so forth. People wanted subgroups of content that were focused in their areas. So they could drill directly to it. They don't want to talk about, how do I process credit cards, when they really want to talk about is, how do I manage a production order? Okay. Two totally separate conversations, and facilitating the wide spectrum of all the possible conversations in a large generic user group is a challenge. So creating those subgroups and helping people identify like-minded individuals that are using the same feature function set to have those conversations was important. So short of having that much structure, you start with a big blast. Who's got an issue? Raise your hand. Right? Tell us about your issue. Who's got an answer for them? How did you approach it? Right? And the moderation was really just encouraging people to share what their issue was, and others to share with them they faced that similar issue and how they moved it forward. Right? There's so many more resources now. I mean, with the community, Open University and the additional content that they're putting out there, the much newer, or at least newer to me, little shorter lunch and learns or end user based training is great. So I think we in the user group in general, getting that kind of information out was important, because I know Acumatica does email blasts. It doesn't get to everyone, but if you're in a user group and people start saying, "Oh, I went to this training at the Open University, and they, this section talked all about that and had an answer for me. Oh, I go to this Asia blog, and they've got some great code snippets. I mean, it was really about trying to surface all of the different resources and make sure that people were available to them. As a partner on a regular basis, hey, are you aware of the community? Are you aware of the new resources that are available? Is your team getting involved and getting engaged? Okay. And instead of doing user group events, which really occupied us in the previous years, is now we're starting to shift towards creating our own webinars internally. Again, it becomes a smaller group, and it's a little more focused on a single topic as opposed to that dynamic conversation that you can have when you get together in person.
Yeah, to your point earlier, I think everyone wants this one big master library that points them to everywhere across the internet that they can find various information about Acumatica. But as you said earlier, the reality is you just get in the room and you find out what people are using and you find out what works. It's more chaotic that way. It's not so nicely and neatly organized. But in reality, you think about how you learn anything. That's really is a way, the best way to do it. It's not about just going through the glossary of the big fat reference book like you had in college. No, you go to your discussion group and you navigate it that way, right? And you're still going to get to the same point. It's just you're not reading a dictionary to get there. You're gonna do it in a more human way and not a machine approach to it.
Absolutely. And with a product like Acumatica that keeps innovating and keeps adding functionality all the time, it would be so hard to keep that dictionary up to date. So that human interaction of someone saying, hey, we started using this new feature and we're doing X, Y, and Z with it can make a dramatic difference. You've essentially shortcut your conversation to the solution.
Oh, yeah, I would say it'd be downright impossible. I mean, even if you took like a social video that you watched had 300 likes, so it must be good. Well, actually, by now, it could be 2 years old, and that feature might not even work the same way anymore, right? So it's just not something you can take an archivist, librarian approach to. It's too much of almost a living, breathing, organic thing, the way they keep adding features so fast, and they just got to talk to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when it's something that is integrating with another product. We've got connectors out there that connect with other solutions now, and those other solutions are progressing, and the mappings between them change, and these are all things you gotta keep in mind. So you just have to go in and you have to experience it. I mean, even reading through the release notes, you can read about what the changes are, but you've got to go in the system and you've got to experience it, because that release note isn't telling you everything about that feature, it and kind of get the finesse of it, if you will, right?
Well, Joel, I know you got another meeting coming up. I appreciate you carving out some time. Any other last final thoughts you wanna bring up?
I would just say thank you so much, Tim, for all that you've done for the Acumatica community. Putting together the AUG forums has been tremendous. Oftentimes customers and even my team members, comment or share links to conversations that were happening on AUG forums. And, you were ahead of the curve by putting that together. I think a lot of the components, that we see going into the community are going to be helpful going forward. And I'm optimistic for, all the things that we can do with Acumatica and the community and all of us getting back together in person again.
You and me both. Also looking forward to that. Hope to be able to meet you physically again sometime soon. You and me both. Also looking forward to that. Hope to be able to meet you physically again sometime soon.
Sounds good.
Hey, thanks again for coming on.
All right. Have a good one, Tim.
All right. Well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of